Ladies and gentlemen, I am Darkside Phil. I have not reviewed a game in quite some time. I have become a live streamer and pretty much never review games. But I am about to review a game that was so controversial and so many people asked me over the course of the 2.5 weeks or so that I was playing it about what was my opinion, what do you think, what about this, what about the controversy, that I said I would review the game in a live stream style format like I'm doing right now once I completed it. Literally moments ago, the credits rolled, we saw the end of The Last of Us Part 2, and I am going to review it for you live right here. Alright, I've got a lot to say about this game, so please bear with me. I'm going to try to do it as best as possible in an objective and then a subjective manner, meaning when I review games, I basically try to balance it. And I try to say, objectively, here's what's good, and subjectively, here's what's good and bad, etc., so that you kind of get an idea, alright? From different perspectives, if you're going to like the game or not. I'm going to approach it in this manner. I'm going to approach this game from two angles. The first angle I'm going to approach The Last of Us Part 2 from is objectively based on gameplay mechanics, length of the game, quality of the gameplay, graphical fidelity, that kind of stuff. Then, we're going to address the story. Why am I splitting it up in such a half and half kind of a deal? Because it's very simple. This game is really polarizing people, mostly dependent on the story. It has really nothing to do with the gameplay mechanics, although I have heard some people be critical of the gameplay, which we'll talk a little bit about. I think most people's issue with The Last of Us Part 2 is with the story. And therefore, that's why we're going to focus primarily on splitting the two subjects so you get a good idea of what to expect with this game. The gameplay mechanics of The Last of Us Part 2 are great, in my opinion, alright? What they do is they take the gameplay elements from the original game and they elaborate upon them. They build upon them. They make it more complex, more modernized, and they allow you to experience basically like a variety of gameplay, even though you're really doing the same thing the whole game. Allow me to explain. You're surviving. There's infected, or there's other groups of survivors that are out to kill you. 9 times out of 10, you're going to need to be sneaking around and surviving. And that means getting behind enemies and taking them down with stealth kills, maybe using quiet weapons to take them out so you don't alert other enemies. But every once in a while, maybe it'll just make more sense to go gung-ho with throwing a bomb or unloading with a gun or whatever, making a ton of noise and just trying to take out whatever's in front of you. The good news here is the gameplay is much improved from the original, okay? I would say probably when you look at stealth games in the modern era, The Last of Us Part 2 probably is right up there with the top games. I'm not necessarily saying it's the best stealth game ever made, but from the games that I've played, even though I suck horribly at stealth, I do feel that the gameplay was superb. Some elements that were added in this game that were different from Last of Us Part 1, the ability to climb and scale objects and ledges. So now instead of everything just kind of being level, go behind cover or whatever and sneak up, now you can actually climb up over things, go behind things, go between things. You could crawl underneath things now. It adds a new dimension, almost a 3-dimensional feel to that stealth and sneaking survival gameplay that really wasn't present so much in the original game. The variety of weapons. There's more weapons in The Last of Us 2 than there were in the first game. There's 2 main protagonist characters, and each character plays a little bit differently. Ellie is more reliant on stealth because she's not very strong, but she has a knife, so when she does stealth takedown, she can more easily take out enemies by slitting their throat almost instantly. She doesn't need the shiv like you had in the first game, which was limited use. Abby, who's the other main character of the game, is basically a brute and has insanely powerful melee attacks, pretty much can power herself out of situations, and has way more health than Ellie, but to take down enemies and the like takes a little bit longer. So each character is a little bit more unique in the way that they play, and definitely I would say this game had so many just like minute improvements upon the original. Things that in the original were a little bit more frustrating, in this game were a little bit more streamlined. The animations are way more fluid in this game. The crafting on the fly is way more easy. The upgrade trees that you can do for the different things, what crafting faster, crafting more, things like that, more fluid, more interesting, more easy to understand. In that regard, it was pretty good. The sneaking itself, gameplay was pretty good. The whole looting thing is pretty much just as prominent as it was in the first game. There was a lot of effing looting in The Last of Us Part 1, and in this game it's no different. You're going to be looting probably 75% of the time you're moving around, grabbing items from every countertop and every little thing. There's going to be collectibles in the game you're going to be trying to get as well, just like in the first game. They add maybe a little bit of supplementary story if it's a note that you find, or maybe it has a safe combination on it so you can get more loot if you find the safe that's appropriately opens. But in general, it's just a lot of sneaking and looting. One thing that's definitely changed from the first game, I would say The Last of Us Part 1 did have a lot more action-oriented combat and not as much sneaking. Not to say the sneaking wasn't prominent in the first game, it absolutely was, but there was a lot more opportunity for kind of open fights. You could fight in the open a lot more, and it was less risky. In The Last of Us 2, it's a lot more risky because things are kind of hitting for a little bit more damage. If you alert one enemy, a lot of enemies tend to come around and horde you or swarm you, not as much so as they did in the first game. I'd actually say in particular the humans in The Last of Us Part 2 are way more dangerous than they were in the first game because they kind of come out in packs. Now they have dogs that they hunt with and the like. That makes it a lot more challenging as well. Enemies. Well, some would say the enemies in this game are much better, and some might say it's not good enough for a sequel. I'm kind of along the towing the line on that one. For the infected, all the original infected from the first game make a return, including the standard, the standard infected, the more faster moving runners, the clickers, which are the ones that can insta-kill you because their heads have been mutated, the bloaters make a return. There are two primarily new enemy types that are a little bit more prominent in this one. One of which being the Shambler, which is basically a more mutated version of a human that basically when they fall down, big gas clouds come out of them. So once you kill them or down them, you got to get the hell out of there because they're going to explode and damage you afterward. Okay? Also, there are Stalkers, I believe they're called. Now, those I believe were in the first game, but not as prominent. In this game, there's a lot more of them. Those are the ones that you cannot detect by listening. Listening is a big mechanic in the Last of Us gameplay, trying to listen for people around you, the noises they make, and you can see them through the walls, similar to like the detective vision from the Batman Arkham series and Spider Sense from the Spider-Man series. They have that in this game, but these particular Stalkers you can't see by listening. You have to just kind of see them with your eyes and react to them, okay? But outside of that, there's not many more new infected enemies. That's pretty much the majority of them. There's one major boss fight against a mutated infected boss that feels like you're playing Resident Evil or The Evil Within. It really doesn't feel like The Last of Us. It's so out of place. Admittedly, though, it's actually one of the more fun fights of the game, in my opinion. The human enemies, in my opinion, are actually where the game varies a lot, because what they did in this game was made the humans feel more realistic. In most games where you have this kind of third-person combat, the enemies are generic. They don't really have personality. They don't really have any relation to each other. Instead, you're just going to kill a bunch of generic dudes, right? In this game, they programmed the human enemies to actually communicate verbally in a way that makes you feel like they know each other, and they actually will talk about things going on in the environment. Like, oh my god, I heard a gunshot over there. Let's go check it out, Val. Okay, Joe, let's go. And then they talk to each other. If one gets down and someone notices, they'll be, oh my god, they got Mikey. Everyone, come over here and swarm the building. I get the feeling that the person's in this building, and then all of a sudden the group of them will show up and swarm the building. It feels a lot more realistic than the first game, and of course most third-person action games in that regard. But it also gives it kind of a human aspect, because now you realize you're actually kind of killing real people. So when Ellie is brutally slashing their throats and blood is squirting everywhere, it's pretty fucked up in a lot of cases, because these people were just talking like normal people 5 seconds earlier. Okay? The enemies, the human enemies, are more varied in this game, although I would say not necessarily a big variety. Most of the human enemies are almost identical. They walk around either with a melee weapon or some kind of a gun. Some of them rarely will have a bow and arrow. Some of them have dogs that they've trained. The dogs are pretty interesting because they can hunt you down by scent. I mean, they don't have to see you. They can actually know you're around a corner because they can smell you. They're a little bit more tricky because if you're fighting the dog, you usually alert everyone else to your position. There are actual tanks in this game, which are basically heavy-duty human enemies that don't really use guns, but they use giant weapons like pickaxes and the like. And those are pretty tough because you have to shoot them multiple times to stun them before you can try to do a melee takedown. And if you try to beat them melee to melee, it's very difficult. That's one of the major changes, is that they do have dogs and these tank characters. But in reality, there's not a lot of them. There's some of them, but it's not super prominent that you're going to be fighting those enemies. It's nice that there's variety. It's nice they added in a few more infected and a few more human enemies, but don't expect too much like, oh my god, I'll be fighting such a wide variety of enemies. It doesn't even feel like the first game. No, it very much feels like the first game, only you're a little bit weaker. You basically can't do a lot of run and gun gameplay because you alert too many people. Stealth's way more prominent. When you play with Ellie, you're much weaker, but you can insta-kill people more quickly. When you play with Abby, she's more of a brute, more of a tank herself, and you're going to get a little bit more of a kind of a brutal, more empowered gameplay using her, okay? So, that's the skinny when it comes to the actual combat, sneaking, looting of the game, okay? The environments are outstanding. Probably some of the best, more realistic environments I've ever seen in a game ever. Going through Seattle, I live just outside of Seattle, and I could tell you that a lot of the places looked pretty realistic. Being down at the waterfront, at the Great Wheel or the aquarium, and actually seeing how they spaced it out properly, how it actually is in Seattle, was quite neat. There's actually a few locations in the game, like there's an arcade that actually exists in Seattle. There's a few parking lots that look exactly like underground parking garages that would be in Seattle. It's pretty damned well done. The world is masterfully orchestrated in that regard. And the graphics, outstanding. The characters all look hyper realistic. When you're even killing the most generic enemy, you feel the guttural cries from them as they're bleeding out. They look so detailed and different, unlike a lot of other games where everyone looks the same. In this game, you know, the character models really do look pretty unique in that regard. Of course, the infected not so much, but the humans, very unique in that regard. I would go as far to say this game is basically The Order 1886 with gameplay. The Order 1886 looked pretty, but had almost no gameplay, just generic third-person run-and-gun stuff. It was shitty. This game is actually a game combined with groundbreaking, amazing, best-of-the-generation style graphics. Okay? That's an amazing achievement. I really feel that. Now, one thing that I abso-freaking-lutely have to call out in this review, because I would actually be doing a disservice if I didn't call it out, was to talk about the accessibility features of The Last of Us Part 2. This is by far the most accessible video game I think I've ever played. It's definitely the most accessible AAA game I've ever played. The second you boot it up, they immediately give you a million options to make this game playable, right? Subtitles, titling or coloring the subtitles differently, having arrows pointing around where the noises are coming from, audio description of so many different things, the gamma adjustments of everything in the game, total crazy different amounts of adjustments of coloring and camera, control schemes, my god, so many different adjustments of the control scheme are available just at the start. And, you know, I definitely want to give a shout out to Super Blind Man, who is a longtime viewer of mine, a longtime supporter and fan of mine, a content creator in his own right, who worked with Naughty Dog amongst a team of other people as well to make this game accessible. He did an outstanding job. The game, accessibility-wise, absolutely needs to be applauded for what they did here. So many people told me that they're actually playing this game for the first time because it's accessible, when a lot of times they wouldn't have been able to previously do that because so many AAA games just don't give a shit about accessibility, and this game kind of laid the groundwork. It is the poster boy example for what other major games should do in the future so everyone can enjoy a major release. Okay, so that's, in general, what I can tell you about the gameplay. There's a few segments of the game that don't adhere to the formula of sneak and survive and loot. There's some, you know, set pieces where running gunning is happening. There's a few parts where you're riding a horse. There's a few parts where you're in a car and you're shooting out of the car. These are very few and far between. In fact, I think there may be less than 5 of them in the entire game, but when they happen, they're actually refreshing because they're so different from the rest of the gameplay of the game, all right? I just described a lot of the gameplay of the game, and you might say, well, thanks for telling us about it, but is it good? And I can tell you it's good, but there's some people who are going to get bored of it because the game primarily feels like you're doing the same thing over and over and over. It doesn't really feel like there's any variety or innovation. It just feels like it's a natural progression from what they did in the last game, but never at one point are you blown away at something that really happens and be like, wow, I've never done that before, or oh, this is groundbreaking. It's more like, it's pretty damn good. I like that they improved it, but it's kind of the same kind of deal that I've done before in other games. So it's good. The graphics are outstanding. The world building is great. By the way, there's some really cool puzzles in the game as well. The last thing I want to talk about is the environments, because as I said, the environments are realistic to Seattle, but the game fully gives you the illusion of open world roaming, but it really isn't. And let me explain. There's one part of the game that actually is open world. When you first start up the game, you get a lengthy intro segment that's about 3 hours long that gives you all the intro and everything. And then you actually go into downtown Seattle with Ellie and her traveling companion, Dina. And when they go out there, it's open world. You can actually go through this several block radius of downtown Seattle. It's supposed to be Capitol Hill, which is kind of the government zone of downtown Seattle. And there's blocks where you can go, oh, I could go into this building and look for loot and investigate. Oh, look, I found a puzzle. You solve the puzzle, you get a combination to a safe that's on the other side of town. You ride over there, you open the safe. So when you're playing this, it's about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And you think, wow, that's crazy. Last of Us 1 was nothing like this. You know, I guess the whole game's going to be like this. Wrong. That's literally the only segment of the game that's open world. From then on, the entirety of the game is linear. It's an area that maybe gives you the illusion that you can explore a little bit and find a little bit of optional stuff, which you can, but in reality, it's always just a set path. There's really no optional ways to do anything, even though it's weird because you might have there's a path that goes this way or goes this way. Well, they both go back to the same point. You see what I mean? Maybe there's an optional building over here you loot along the way, but they all just veer back to the same point, and there's no way that you can really do things out of sequence or veer off the path and find, I found a giant secret area. Doesn't exist in the game. Although, admittedly, I do like the fact that I would say almost like Hitman, the game has different ways that you can go through and beat missions. I found certain ways, like, okay, I'm in a village with a bunch of people after me. I take them all out, then I realize, oh shit, there was a river over here where I could have swam under the buildings and come up and stealth kill them all from behind. I didn't know that was there, so I did it a different way. There are different ways you can go about surviving and taking out your enemies in the game. There's definitely replayability in that regard. Also, the collectibles, I would say probably incredibly difficult to get them all in one go. Ellie's collecting comic book cards, Abby's collecting quarters. They don't really have much meaning at all. They're just collectibles for the sake of collectibles. I've also heard there's absolutely no way you can platinum the game in one run because there's too much going on with the upgrades and everything, and the game requires you to get every upgrade, every collectible to platinum it. So when you beat the game, there's New Game Plus, and New Game Plus allows you to start off with all your weapons and upgrades from the first run. This New Game Plus, definitely you're going to platinum the game, okay? Gameplay lengthwise, my playthrough was roughly 30 hours long, give or take. It might have been a little bit shorter. It might have been a little bit longer. Now, keep in mind, I did go out of my way to try to find all the collectibles. I was looting constantly. I was trying to solve all the puzzles, and I might have missed some along the way for sure. I know I didn't get all the collectibles, but for the most part, I took my time. I tried to read all the optional notes and logs about the world that, that add supplementary material as I could, and I know that extended the length of the playthrough. I definitely could have beaten the game, probably I would feel in about 20 hours if I never really explored. If I just kind of rushed right through the main plot line, probably would have been about 20. So I would give it a range of 20 to 30 hours long, okay? I've just talked about the graphics, the gameplay, the world design, the puzzles, the accessibility. We got all that out of the way. I think that stuff was quite good. Was it best I've ever played? In some times, yes, and other times, no. I would definitely say it got repetitive at certain points. There were 1 or 2 points of the game where I was like, there's just too many effing enemies in this. I got to get through this, and I ran through it to the next logical point instead of slowly taking my time to kill everything. Although most times I did do that. I took my time, all right? But it was quite, in my opinion, liking the kind of formula of gameplay that was in this game. I liked it more. The game, by the way, was also very scary in certain places. A lot of jump scares, a lot of situations where you feel like you're going to die or something gruesome is going to happen. And because of that, I do feel that it was a lot different from the tone of the first game. It's actually more scary than the first game. Definitely a lot more gory than the first game. The kills in this game, a lot of the stuff that happens is very, very visceral. Like I said, Ellie executing people, taking the knife and going zip, and you see the blood and gore coming out of the people's necks. It can be pretty disgusting at times, okay? So just to forewarn you, it's actually more violent, for sure, than the first game was, all right? All that said and good, we got to talk about the plot of this game because this is what most people have an issue with. I am not here to tell you a summary of the plot. What I'm going to tell you is what I overall thought of the plot, what I think about the direction of the plot by Neil Druckmann, and my issues with the plot, okay? The overall plot, in a nutshell, is a story about revenge. It's a story about Ellie having mass loss because she loses her father figure Joel within the first few hours of the game. The entirety of the game is basically a story of her hunting down the people responsible. All right. Now, we all kind of knew this was a story of revenge just by watching the trailers. We knew that. But to the extent that the game hammers it in, that Ellie is a changed person and she's really bent on revenge and she's willing to go to any length. She's going to kill as many people as she possibly can to avenge Joel, is kind of hammered in there. Really ham-fisted kind of writing with how crazy she's changed from the first game when she really wasn't like that, okay? On the flip side of the game, the other half of the story is the story of Abby, the girl who murders Joel in the first few hours of the game. And her story is that she's actually the daughter of a person that Joel murdered in the process of getting Ellie out of the hospital at the last moments of The Last of Us Part 1. So Abby's life has been ruined, completely destroyed. Mentally, she's destroyed because her father was murdered by Joel at the end of the first game, which is why she murders Joel in the first few hours of this game, okay? But the difference in the stories is shocking, because Ellie's story is very much a story of revenge, hatred, getting back at someone who gave her great loss. Abby's story picks up, all right, basically at a point where she's already gotten her revenge. She already went through what Abby went through, got her revenge by killing Joel, and now it's her job to kind of do a redemption story. It's kind of weird because her side of the story is very similar to Joel's story from the original Last of Us, where Joel was supposedly a really bad guy. People didn't really like him or trust him. He was a down-low, dirty guy who was a smuggler. He wasn't very trustworthy. He killed tons of people, cold-hearted. But over the course of the game, as he gets this father-daughter relationship with Ellie, he warms up and he kind of becomes a whole person again. Abby, after getting her revenge on Joel, basically the rest of the game is about her experiences with the people who she's living with and everything, going through this redemption plot arc, running into people who she thought were her enemies but end up being her friends, finding out more about them and finding out they're not so bad, like she was brainwashed to believe by the leader of her group. Then basically finding out all her group members were murdered by Ellie over the course of Ellie's plot in the game. And of course then basically coming to a realization by the end of the game, she doesn't care about any of that. She doesn't care about killing anyone. She just wants to live a peaceful life, okay? It's very different and very juxtaposing the way this plot is done. I think the plot would have been a lot better if it was actually ordered in a way that wasn't insanely confusing, with tons of time lapses, flashbacks, cutting between the two characters in a chaotic and confusing way, to the point where it's like, you want me to care about these characters, but the way that they're presented doesn't make me care about them because of critical things that happen in the plot that are screwed up, all right? Allow me to explain what I mean. Let's start with Ellie. Ellie in The Last of Us 1 was supposed to be a girl who knew she was the only person who was immune that anyone knew of. She could be the savior of the human race, and it was Joel's job to deliver her to the Fireflies. Over the course of the first game, we find out that Ellie grew up in this apocalyptic world. She didn't have a chance to live in the world before the infected, okay? So she doesn't know anything about the frivolity of teenagers. She doesn't know what it's like to have teen angst and drama, or to have a crush or a love affair. For her, life is more about survival. Now, if you actually play the DLC to The Last of Us 1, you get a little bit of backstory about her, about how she had a best friend who maybe there was some romantic involvement there. You don't know because they were so young anyway, it's hard to tell. But the best friend gets killed in that DLC, and that's plot development for her to be who she is in the actual Last of Us video game, the first campaign. There's actually a critical moment in the plot of The Last of Us 1 that I have to call out in this review, because this is a moment that I feel was completely glossed over or forgotten by the writers of the sequel. There's a moment where Ellie breaks apart from the group of survivors. She runs off alone. And of course, you got Tommy and Joel who are running out there to save her desperately. What the hell is she thinking running off by herself? When Joel storms into this house, finds her reading a journal of a teenage girl, probably her age or maybe a few years even older than her, from before this whole outbreak apocalypse happen. And she's reading it, and it's all like, oh, I kissed a boy today, and does he like me? Do I look good? This and that, you know, all teen angsty kind of shit that in reality doesn't really matter, but it's the thing that teens kind of fuss over constantly in the real world when teens have the opportunity to do those things because the world is safe. They're not at every moment worried about survival or whatever, and therefore it's in character for teens to kind of act dramatic, okay? Ellie's reading this journal in The Last of Us Part 1 and says, man, you know, how could kids have been that dumb back then? Because now we realize how dire life is and how precious it is and how hard it is to survive. We don't have time for this shit, right? And that was kind of her character. Not to say there weren't moments in the game that were personable. She had the joke book, and that kind of personalized her and Joel's relationship and how they warmed up to each other over the course of the game. But in general, the whole point of that moment was to prove that Ellie was not like teens in the modern world here, where when we were all young, we were stupid and we all cared about dramatic, stupid shit, right? She's different, okay? The Last of Us 2 forgets all of that. Literally, like, erases all of that experience that we got from the first game. And Ellie is now a little bit older, but now she's immature. She cares about teen drama. Oh, I kissed a girl in a bar, and someone said that we were, insulted us and said that it was disgusting that two girls would kiss each other in the bar, and we were so offended by that. And then she's running off with this girl in the middle of a snowstorm when they're being chased down by infected. They run into this hideout of a guy who used to be a firefly. They don't know if this place is safe. They don't know if there's infected outside in the blizzard barging down at the doors trying to kill them. But they decide to have a love scene. And they also decide to smoke weed. What? Like, huh? This is supposed to be life or death. You're supposed to be seriously trying to survive every possible moment. If this were realistic to the character development of the first game, none of that would have happened. It would have been, we got to batten down the hatches, make this place safe. Fuck the weed. Who gives a shit about that? We got to make sure everything here is safe, and then we got to get our asses out there because there's other patrols out there stuck in the snowstorm who may be getting killed by these infected. That would have been Ellie from The Last of Us 1. But because a few years have passed, we're supposed to believe her entire personality has completely changed, and she's an irrational, immature, irresponsible idiot. That's the plot of Ellie in The Last of Us 2. And this happens multiple times over the course of the game. There's another point in the game a little bit later, after Joel has been murdered brutally, okay? The plot is Ellie is supposed to be heading out into Seattle to hunt down these people, Abby's group, who murdered Joel, okay? Great. So that means time is of the essence. We got to rush out there, and we got to be on every clue. We got to get as many resources as we can, and we got to be on their ass to make sure they don't get away. So while you're in open world roaming of Seattle, you decide to go to a music shop and sit down inside of a music shop you have not secured. There could be infected around the fucking corner or in a closet next to you. And she picks up a guitar and starts playing a guitar song of a song that she remembers that Joel played her. What the fuck is that? Is Ellie an actual survivor, or is she just survived by complete clumsiness? Is she the Mr. Magoo of The Last of Us world, where literally she does the dumbest shit but somehow always survives? Or did someone writing this game completely fucking forget her characterization from the first game? And of course the answer is the latter. The writer basically retconned everything about Ellie's character from the first game in order to prove a narrative point. Ellie now is a teenager, so she's full of emotion. She can't control her emotions, and because of that, she has these moments of stupidity where she's smoking weed, having a love scene that's completely superfluous to the game and doesn't need to be in it. Out for revenge, can't control herself. Oh God, she can't control herself, and it's so ham-handed and fisted. This writing pounding in your head every possible moment that you groan. I'm sorry, but the characterization of Ellie from The Last of Us 1 was far better than this character is in the sequel. In the sequel, she's very one-dimensional, very one-sided, can't really get out of this stigma of revenge. And that's not good writing. It's just not. Let's talk a little bit about Joel. The bait and switch. Everyone thought Joel was in this game for a lengthy period of time because there were trailers literally showing him later on in the game that were bait and switch because those were scenes with actually a different character in the real game. They swapped the characters out for the trailer to make you think Joel would be longer in the game when he wasn't. It's blatant false advertising that Neil Druckmann claimed was done for artistic purpose because he wanted to hide the true plot of the game. He didn't want people to know that Joel was going to die so early on in the game. Well, guess what? That's a big fuck you to people who actually believe the advertising for the game, like the Joel character, buy the game and find out he's barely in it. He's basically only in flashback sequences, okay? Joel also is completely out of character in this game because the Joel we know from The Last of Us 1 is the ultimate survivor. He's the one who was the smuggler who, against all odds, would deliver the package or deliver whatever it was, the delivery, and people were shocked that he would get away with the stuff that he did and that he survived as long as he did. That's why they entrusted him to have the one human who was immune to this fungus to deliver that human, because they thought he was the one who could get the job done. Even though he wasn't even a Firefly, the Fireflies trusted him with this ultimate job, okay? How does Joel die in The Last of Us 2? Well, he just happens to be being chased by infected. He's with Tommy, his brother, and they run into Abby by complete accident. What a critical plot device, huh? Well, of course, we know Abby wants him dead because he murdered her father in the first game. Abby leads Joel and Tommy to the base where all of her people are hanging out. All right. And when they go in to this area, all right, basically Joel forgets everything about his survival skills. He doesn't remember that, oh, this is a new group of people I just met. Maybe I shouldn't trust them. He tells them his name. He tells them where they're from. Tommy tells them where they're from. Says we should go hang out at where we are. Literally just 1,000,000% does everything wrong, and then they get murdered for it. Well, I take that back. Joel gets murdered for it. I mean, if Joel were in character to his character from the first game, he would never have died in the sequel. But they retconned everything you know from the first game for the sake of pushing a narrative. They needed Joel to die early so that Ellie would become this emotion-infused character who does stupid shit constantly and cannot be stopped from getting her revenge. Okay? All plot devices, and in my opinion, bad writing. It's completely out of character from what you liked about the first game. Okay? Now let's talk a little bit about Abby. Abby, a character who everything you're told in the game about her is that she's a horrible person. She's a vicious killer for this group of survivors from Seattle called the Wolves. She kills everyone wanton, like left and right, without reckless abandon, no consideration for anything. If her boss Isaac tells her to kill someone, she goes and does it. People actually like, whoa, it's Abby. Holy shit. She's the vicious killer. You got to treat her with reverence and respect because, you know, she's the hot shit in this group. Okay? Her first few moments of the game are getting revenge on Joel. And from that, after that happens, all of a sudden, she becomes a good character. Everything she does is basically like good-hearted stuff. During the course of her character development, you befriend all these people who she was with in the Wolves. Of course, if you're someone like me who played the first game and saw this character murder Joel within the first few hours, you hate this fucking character. You don't want to get to know Abby. You don't give two shits about her backstory. You want her dead. She killed Joel. It's fucked up, right? But the game literally has one half of the game where you play as Abby and you have to know everything about her. Her past with her father and the Fireflies, how she has these relationships with all these different wolf characters. Later on in the game, she runs into a group of survivors a group of outcasts from the rival faction in Seattle, which is called the Seraphites, also known as the Scars. They're basically a cult of religious nuts who believe all these religious crazy things about that there was a prophet who they have to follow her way and all of this stuff. So there's two people who are outcasts as part of that group. She befriends them and comes to find out, gee, maybe not everyone in that group was evil to begin with. Maybe they're just misguided by this really weird way of thought, and maybe they're not all bad, they're just really misled. And that's kind of the common plot of her. It's her realization over the course of the game that she's been doing the wrong thing all along. That listening to the wolves and just blindly following orders isn't the right thing to do, especially when she befriends two people who are from the enemy group. Of course, during the course of the plot, the leader of her group finds that she's befriended the people and orders her to step away so he can kill them. She refuses, and now all hell breaks loose, and now her own people are now out to kill her because she sided with these people from the other group. So it's very cliche. It's a very cliche story of redemption and realization. Is it necessarily terrible? No. But you gave that story of redemption to a character you hate because you killed Joel. You know what I mean? Like, Abby killed Joel, so you give this redemption story to anyone else, maybe I would have cared. You gave it to the character who killed the person who was beloved from the first game within the first few hours, so no one gives a fuck. You see what I'm saying? Like, the way that I see this game is like Neil Druckmann, the director of the game, wanted to tell a story of hatred on the one side and redemption on the other. Two juxtaposed characters from different backgrounds and different backstories, and how they're at odds for the entirety of the game. All right? That's fine. But do you sacrifice everything you built in your first game that people loved and most people agree was one of the best games of last console generation, if not the best? I said it was my Game of the Year pick for 2013. Do you sacrifice all of that you created, that amazing thing, in order to create a new narrative for the sequel? Do you really make us want to retcon everything we know about these beloved characters? Do you really want us to stop caring about everything that we cared about in order to push an agenda and tell a story? That's exactly what happens in The Last of Us Part 2. We're expected to not care about any of that shit from the first game and instead just swallow a new story. Tough shit. Why can't you believe these characters changed in such a huge, dramatic way between the first and second game? Because that's not who they are. That's not who they were characterized as, and that's why I don't buy it. The story of Abby isn't a bad story, but Abby is hated from the moment you meet her. Now you want us to care about her for the rest of the game. I also have issues not only just with the story in general, but the way that the story is paced and the way that the story is laid out in the game. The story starts off supposedly in present day. Ellie and Joel living with this group of survivors in Jackson, along with Tommy and all those other people who had lived at the dam in the first Last of Us. Once Joel is murdered, okay, the game separates. Now you're playing as Ellie, and you're trying to hunt down the people who killed Joel. But there's many time lapses back to the past where you have flashback sequences where Ellie's younger and she's doing things with Joel and Tommy. They're going to a museum. They're fighting infected inside of a hotel. They're doing these things that, in honesty, if that was The Last of Us Part 2, you probably would have liked a hell of a lot more. But these are literally wedged and juxtaposed into the story of Ellie's revenge, more than likely to break up the killing. Because everywhere Ellie goes, she kills this wolf, she kills another wolf, she kills every single friend that Abby ever had without any real justification, just because they were there when Joel was murdered, until she finally hunts down Abby. It's gruel, it's gruel. It's cruel, it's grueling, it's gory, it's disgusting. It really feels like there's movies out there from like the 1970s, grindhouse movies that are like this. It's just kill, 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 revenge, revenge, revenge. That's what her plotline feels like. And because it was so dark, I feel that Neil Druckmann felt he had to interpose these flashbacks to when Joel was still alive to break it up. So it's not just so dark, dark, gore, gore, kill, kill. Because it might have been too much for people to handle if he had done it like that. Okay? So the story gets to a point when Ellie's side, where basically they can't find Abby, they give up, the survivors are going to go back to Jackson. Well, all of a sudden, Abby finds them, kills one of them, just out of the blue, boom, shoots him in the face, and now, here comes the big culmination, right? You've played the game now for about 15, 20 hours as Abby, her ridiculous revenge quest. You're going to get the culmination, right? Wrong, because Neil says, guess what, folks? Fuck you. You've been waiting this long for some kind of a payoff. Now you got to wait another 15 hours because we're going to go tell Abby's side of the story. So you got to wait for any kind of a resolution. So now you flash to Abby's side and it's like, what? You get the biggest feeling of like disappointment, blue balls. You're like, are you kidding me? I played all through that horrible out of character gameplay of Ellie to get to this point, and now you're gonna make me wait to see what happens. Yes, because now you have to experience the entire story through Abby's side. Her story picks up basically when she gets back to base with the wolves after she murdered Joel, and you have to go through this complex plot line of her going through stuff with the wolves. Oh no, someone who she had a romantic relationship in the past is missing. I have to go hunt this person down. And so she goes through all this thing, killing people left and right to try to get to this guy, to find out what happened to him and see if he's okay. When you get all romantic flashbacks of her and this guy in the past. Then when she finally gets to the guy, there's a gratuitous sex scene in the game. I'm not going to harp on this, but I'm just going to say this. The Last of Us Part 1 was one of the best written games I've ever experienced in my life. Okay? Probably I'll hold it up to that regard as I get older as well. I'll probably still think it's one of the best stories I've ever experienced in a game. How many sex scenes did The Last of Us Part 1 have? 0! Because it didn't have to go to those stupid cliche ways of humanizing characters or making you feel more for the character. It didn't have to do that. It didn't have to go there. It didn't have to go to the low denominator of, oh, let's throw a sex scene in there for shock value or love or whatever. You just cared about the characters because the writing was good. Alright? This game has to go there. Not only does it have to have the most over-the-top gratuitous gore and hate-filled plot lines, it also has to have sex scenes in it, just so they have them in there and they can say that they're in there. Okay? So then, the first half of Abby's story is completely pointless, because by the time that she actually gets to the guy who she supposedly had a romantic relationship with, you find out that he's gotten another girl pregnant, that he's now with this other girl, and they're planning to leave and go to Santa Barbara, California in Hunt of the Fireflies. Well, guess what? Abby has sex with him anyway, so she's a horrible person. Even though the whole story is supposed to be a story of like redemption and her growing, she's a horrible person. She basically makes the guy cheat, okay? And then it's back to another plot line of now she's basically trying to get back to her people, but she has these interactions with these two outcast scars or seraphites, the people who were in the cult, who were thrown out of the cult because one of them basically identified as a different gender, and identifying as a different gender, they cut their hair, and the cult is like, you are not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to cut hair. You're not allowed to act as anything that you are. If you're a boy, you're a boy. If you're a girl, you're a girl. And if you disagree, that's against the cult rules. So literally, the cult's trying to kill these two kids. So Abby befriends these kids, and the plot line now becomes trying to save these kids' lives. One of the kids gets their arm horrendously fucking smashed to the point where it's disgusting, gruesome shit, torture scene. And now she has to try to save the kid's life. So now I have to go to a hospital to get supplies to save the kid. So now I got to do this to save the kids. Uh-oh, one of the kids is upset because their mother now might not want to go with them to Santa Barbara. So now you got to go try to save the mother. So it's just really drawn out, lengthy, elongated plot with Abby. I'm not going to go to every single scene, but it's basically a story of her redemption. After her revenge quest where she kills Joel, then, you know, she becomes a horrible person, sleeps with this fucking dude who already has a pregnant girlfriend. Then she decides she's going to become a good person. So she has to do all the right things. She has to try to save these Seraphites and do all the right things. And the game all of a sudden becomes the story of Abby's redemption. All right? Maybe if Abby didn't kill Joel in the first 3 hours of the game, you would buy it. I didn't buy it or care because guess what? Joel's dead. She brutally murdered the most meaningful character of the first game within the first few hours of this one. I don't care about her story of fucking redemption anymore, okay? So then near the end of Abby's storyline, we finally, around like 25 hours into this game, get back to the scene where Abby ran into Ellie and the other survivors, and we get the culminating scene. This scene is so fucking terrible. And here's why. This scene forces you to play as Abby and hunt down Ellie. It's the last thing I ever wanted to do in a video game. I never wanted to ever draw a weapon or pull a gun on the other protagonist who you've grown to love over the course of a game and a game and a half now. A character who you feel is completely mistreated in this game and out of character. It's awful. It's literally misery in a game, okay? It's once you hit this point, you don't want to play anymore. I literally said to everyone playing the game, I said, I don't want to do this scene where I'm beating up Ellie with these fucking giant roided arms that Abby has. It's fucked up, it's gory, it's disgusting. I don't want to do this. The game's forcing me to do things that I hate. What other game can you say? The game literally forced me to hate myself to get through this part of the game, right? It's misery. I don't think I've ever played a game that when I played it for 25 hours, I felt so miserable. And I felt like shit. And I said to my viewers at that point, if I were playing this game personally for myself and it wasn't doing it for a live stream and I wasn't doing it because I knew I wanted to professionally review the game when I was done, I would have turned the fucking game off, put the controller down, and never played it again. I said, I don't even want to see how it ends because it made me feel so bad at that point to have the two protagonists fighting each other, killing each other, gore, disgusting shit, taking Dina, who's you know, the romantic interest of Ellie, and smashing her fucking face into the fucking theater floors, blood going everywhere. Like, fuck this game. Like, what are you doing? Like, what is this? This isn't entertaining. This isn't fun. This is torture. to have to watch this misery. Do I play games to make myself feel like shit constantly? Am I a fucking an asshole who loves to torture himself? Of course not. Why the fuck am I going through this? And that's how I felt playing through this portion of the game. The final segment of the game basically has Abby let Ellie go. Okay, I'll let you go. That should have been the end of the game right there. But no, there's more misery. Because Druckmann said, I can't release you from this misery gore game. I now have to continue the pain. Ellie is haunted by the death of Joel. The fact that she had a chance to get Abby and Abby got away. She can't live with it. Even though she now lives in a nice house with her girlfriend Dina and the baby, because Dina was pregnant. That was a part of the plot line. She has a family now. She can't let it go. She's so haunted by Joel's death, she again has to go after Abby again. The game's not fucking over. There's more gore to come. The ending basically is completely not satisfying. And the truth is, a lot of people had a ton of issue with the ending. I don't think I had as much issue with the ending as most people. Reason being, most people were looking for some kind of an ultimate resolution. They wanted a culmination of someone lives, someone dies, something happens. And just without spoiling the ending of the game, that doesn't happen. It's very unsatisfying what happens. But if you're following along the plot line that Druckmann was telling you through the whole game, revenge, 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 it's a circle of evil because Ellie, well, first of all, Abby wanted revenge, so she hunts down Joel and kills him. But that turns Ellie into a cold-blooded killer who goes through the game killing all of Abby's friends to the point where now, oh my God, do you see how horrible it's gotten? But then Abby finally forgives Ellie. Now it's a redemption story for Abby, but Ellie still can't let it go. Revenge, revenge, revenge. You see, the whole plot is so cliche and so ham-fisted that it's just so shoved down your throat, it's not entertaining anymore. And the fact that you have to have these disgusting, gory scenes constantly throughout the game, the main characters cutting each other, fucking each other up so badly, it's just, it's not fun. All right, it's a story. It has a morality story behind it. It absolutely does. And when you're done playing the game, you're like, man, I get it. Because yeah, I got it 5 hours in, I got it 10 hours in, I got it, I got it the whole game. I get it. That ending made sense per what Druckmann was trying to say. But did you feel good about playing this game? Did you actually feel at the end of the day when you were done experiencing this disgusting, horrendous misery story that you're happy that you played the game? When I finished The Last of Us Part 1, I sat there with my audience and we talked on stream for a bit about the possibility of a sequel. We're like, man, just think about the morality choices here that Joel did what he just did. Is Joel a villain or is he a hero? And everyone disagreed with me during the credits rolling in The Last of Us 1. Everyone disagreed. Everyone had a different opinion. And we were all speculating about the awesomeness that The Last of Us 2 could be. Not a single person in 2013 thought that 7 years later we'd be sitting here saying this was the most miserable game we've ever played and we're sad that we played it. And that's how you feel when you finish The Last of Us Part 2. Because it forgets all the good things about the first game plot-wise. It creates this misery, gore, disgusting atmosphere of pain and suffering and revenge that never lets hold until the very, very fucking end. And at that point, you're like, I got it 5 hours in. You didn't have to make me play another 25 hours of annoying misery to get your point, Mr. Druckmann. I got it 5 hours in. You didn't have to keep doing it to me like this, okay? To me, all right, to me, this game, the best comparison I can give to it is kind of the same way that people feel about the modern Star Wars movies, okay? You took something that was so beloved, so held up in high regard by so many people, and you changed it so much to push a different kind of a narrative that you destroyed everything you created before, okay? People talk about George Lucas all the time. He's a creative genius, 1980s, all the Star Wars trilogy, Indiana Jones, all the shit George Lucas did. At some point, George Lucas lost his mind, decided to destroy the original trilogy of Star Wars movies by adding CGI. He made the prequel trilogy, which no one thought was anywhere near as good as the originals, to the point where people hated him so much they lambasted him and blacklisted him from his own creations, and now new people make new movies. Guess what? The new trilogy of Star Wars now is being made fun of. Everyone hates it. It's not true enough to the originals. It takes the characters from the originals and puts them in completely out of character and ruins who they are. It feels like The Last of Us 2 is the same thing all over again. Neil Druckmann is the George Lucas of game development. He made an amazing masterpiece. It resonated for everyone who played it. And people were like, we can't wait to see what Druckmann does next. And what he put out next was so different from what the original masterpiece was, and changed everything so much that people don't like it because he tried to do something different. I'm not saying that The Last of Us 2 is the worst game ever made. Far from it. Amazing gameplay, really great world building. Like I said, the graphics, some of the best I've ever seen. It feels like the Order 1886 with actually a game behind it this time. Improved gameplay elements. It's insanely lengthy, 30 hours, all right, of gameplay. You're going to get a lot, and that's only if you only play it once. If you replay it to get the collectibles, you're going to get even more out of it. Variety in the gameplay with Ellie and Abby playing differently on each side of the campaign, all right? But when you combine all of the, and I should say the accessibility, insanely positive, right? But when you combine all those improvements and positives with a plot that's so polarizing, you're bound to get what happened with The Last of Us Part 2. You got people literally kissing its butt as a work of art, and you got people saying it's a bad game. As a work of art, The Last of Us Part 2 is great. If you ignore the fact that when you play a video game, you're looking for something that's fun, with a resolution that makes sense, with an ending that you feel accomplished at the end of the game, and everything you did mattered, and you really felt like something happened there in that game. And if you feel it, wow, that was great. It was the continuation of the plot lines and characters from the first game, and it was really fun. Maybe they introduced some new characters, and it really worked out. That's not what you get in this game. If you're looking for that as a good game, you're not going to get it. If you're looking as just a work of art, a plot that does make sense, all right, it's there, but it's miserable. You know, people say, oh, it was funny because one person who's an actor on Twitter compared The Last of Us Part 2 to Schindler's List. Schindler's List is not a fun movie. That movie is brutal. It's disgusting. It talks about how the Jews were mass murdered by the Nazis and how someone, basically Schindler, had to try to smuggle them out and save as many lives as he could at a time when otherwise every other, you know, all the Germans and Nazis were doing horrible things to these Jews. It's a very, very gruesome movie. But at the end of the day, at the end of the movie, you feel like something good came out of it. Schindler was a good person, and here's what happened. Here's his story. And, you know, you feel like you got something out of it. Despite you went through this horrendous journey, you got something at the end. I didn't feel that at the end of Last of Us Part 2 whatsoever. I felt like this game was meant to make you feel like shit. This game was literally designed to make you feel bad, and I don't want that in a video game. Okay? I don't. And in reality, the difference between a movie and a video game, a movie you watch, yes, there's a story that may bother you, but you watch it. A video game you play. I was forced with this controller to brutally hurt both Ellie and Abby, to cut them up, to break their bones, to have gore. I was forced to do that. I didn't want to. The game made me be a horrible person with the things that I had to fucking do to complete this game. I feel like shit for playing this game. I do. That's not the point of a video game. The point of a video game is to try to have some fun, to relax, to have a good time. Maybe some games there's challenge. When you overcome the challenge, you feel a sense of accomplishment. You're not doing it to make yourself feel bad. Why would I pay to make myself feel bad? Like, I don't have enough stress in my life. I gotta get more out of playing a fucking video game. That's where Druckmann doesn't get it. He literally there's a quote from Druckmann. He says, "We didn't talk about fun when making The Last of Us Part 2. Mr. Druckmann, that's where you went wrong. When you made a video game and the point of it wasn't to actually have a good time and have fun, you missed the point of gaming. You missed the actual reason that video games fucking exist, and escape from reality. A way you can get some kind of fun, some kind of derision, some kind of positivity in your life. It's a way to escape. It's not a way to give yourself more negativity and misery. Why did you think this is what people wanted? What is wrong with you?" I would love to hear this answer, because he'd probably answer, well, because it's artistic and not all art is happy and good. That's true. And that's why I don't have portraits on my wall of bodies being ripped apart and intestines squirting all over the fucking place. And I don't surround myself with misery art. You know, I like to have positive things in my free time. I don't pay to see nasty shit and to have misery constantly. And that's what the plot of this game pretty much is until the very last moments when it has an ending that's completely unsatisfying. So, how the fuck do you rate a game like this? How do you rate a game like this? You know what I mean? Like, there's definitely big positives to the gameplay elements of the game. There are fun moments in the plot. Every time that there's a flashback between Ellie and Joel and Tommy, and it shows the way that it was before everything went to shit in this game, it's actually good. It's fun. It's positive. It's like, this is what I wanted. This is what I got from the first game. This is what I wanted in this one. But then, you know, you have to be honest and say, how can I say this game is a great game when the game actually hurt me? It made me feel bad. It made me not want to play any further. And then at the end of the day, when the game ended, the ending was not in any way, shape, or form anything that I wanted. It was basically, oh, here's a lesson that you learned a few hours into the game, but we tell it to you again after 30 hours of misery, right? You know, it's so hard to review this game. So here's what I'm going to do, all right? You could completely disagree with me, all right? And that's okay. But I'm going to weigh it and balance it based on this. The gameplay, the world design, the graphics, the accessibility features, all of that was insanely dramatically improved, in my opinion. You could disagree. Some people might want it to be more action-based rather than stealthy, less survival horror. I liked where they went with it in this game. That's insanely positive, kind of almost best of a generation. The plot is terrible, makes you feel like shit, is not a well-written plot. Not even the pacing is good with the constant flashes back. It's just jarring. If just simply the plot was ordered better, it would have been a better game. But the plot itself is not satisfying. It's completely different tone and completely different from the first game. Not a plot that I even needed to experience in a video game. It's like the low of a generation for me. Okay? So how do you balance the best versus the worst? You meet it in the middle. The Last of Us 2 is a 5 out of 10. It really is. And it's not because it's a bad game to play. It's because it's a misery. It's a misery to play. Because the whole game you hope for something better. You hope that something's going to happen that'll turn this around. And it just gets worse and worse. More gory, more disgusting, more fucked up, more miserable, more cliche, more nonsense. And then at the end of the day, when you play for 30 hours and you're hoping for the light at the end of the tunnel, that light at the end of the tunnel is a freight train coming your way that runs you the fuck down into a human pancake. Sorry for quoting a Metallica song. Not that the pancake part was from the Metallica song, but that's exactly what this game feels like. You're working towards the end, the resolution. Fuck you. You wasted 30 hours and now you feel like shit. That's how I feel playing this game. Last of Us 2 for me is a balance of the best and the worst. Average amount, it's a 5 out of 10. You disagree? That's perfectly fine. You like the game? That's fine. You hated the game? That's fine. I hope this review gave you enough of information to make a judgment for yourself on whether or not you want to check it out. I know it was full of spoilers. Don't worry, I will tag it as such when I put this up on YouTube. But holy shit, this will be the most polarizing game to this point in my life that I think I've ever played. Because you're going to have people who didn't care about the misery aspect, that didn't care about the characters from the first game, and probably say it's the best game ever. I completely disagree there. So, sorry, you know, if you disagree with me, that's perfectly fine, but that's my feeling. All right? That's my review of The Last of Us Part 2. There's no DLCs coming out for it. Neil Druckmann already said no expansions for this one. Will there be a sequel? Likely there will be, because the game ends completely open-ended with tons of unanswered questions, and probably it's because he wants to make a third game. The game sold like hotcakes, so it's probably going to have a third one. So if you liked the misery of this one, there's a lot more coming, guys. I can't wait to see how else they gruesomely kill each other and fuck each other up in the next one. Man, maybe they'll like rip each other's feet off and shove them down their throats or something. I mean, that's pretty much what this game was, most of it. So thank you guys for watching my review of The Last of Us Part 2. That's it. I'm done. I can't even say another word. I'm out. Peace out, guys. Thanks for watching.